Hi. So the Supreme Court of the United States has just backed Donald Trump's policy of excluding trans people from military service. There have also been some articles recently about the Obama-era decision to include women in combat roles, and the British Army's been moving in this direction as well. So this has reopened some debates about the nature of military and public service, which I'd like to address today. These are obviously pretty complex, multifaceted issues, but I'd just like to focus on the principles behind the notion of public service, and in particular the attempts to push back on trans inclusion. Many have argued that military service is not a fundamental, inalienable right such as freedom of speech or freedom of religion, and it's instead something more like a privilege or a duty. There's certainly some truth to that in the sense that we put restrictions on who can serve in certain military roles, restrictions based on fitness or age or skill. However, this is a simplistic characterization which masks an often complex relationship between public service and fundamental human rights. In many Western democracies, the armed forces are viewed as a sort of necessary evil, with little attention being paid to the important role that the military play in public life and the public conception of the country. But historically, especially in democracies, military service has been linked to the development of political and personal rights and freedoms. In ancient Athens, rights did not just mean the right to be left alone by the state. It was better understood as the right to participate in the public life of the polis. This was tied up with the privilege or the duty of defending the city in times of war. The basic liberties, such as economic freedom and the right to a fair trial, were therefore completely tied up in military service. Only free men had the right to join the army, and only men had basic political rights and freedoms. Part of excluding slaves and women from military service was that if they were included in public service, they would have to be afforded the same rights and the same liberties as everyone else. So, exclusion from military service was equated with exclusion from public life in general. Casting public service as a heavy burden best shouldered by educated and propertied men has long served as a way of disguising patriarchal and bigoted or racist systems behind a veil of duty. This tactic remains pervasive in our society today. If we trace the extension of women's rights in the Western world, we can see how this is very closely tied up to notions of military and public service in general. The controversial inclusion of female nurses in the Crimean War helped pave the way for a greater involvement in public life for women, with British feminists taking Florence Nightingale as an inspiration. Furthermore, the role played by women during the World Wars, both at home and abroad, helped to break down traditional notions of gender roles. As women participated more and more in public service, it became impossible to deny them the same economic and political rights that had been afforded to men. Periods of military service were born out of crisis, and it did not provide women with new rights overnight. There were numerous attempts to push back against advances, with women often leaving the service and returning to lower paid, lower prestige roles. However, these periods helped to break down traditional barriers and lay the groundwork for what the women's movement was able to achieve later. By showing that women could serve their country as effectively and courageously as men, either as fighters or nurses or mechanics or munitions workers, they changed the face of Western society and Western gender relations. The same could be said of Black Americans, whose military service helped to break down racial barriers in fits and starts from the Revolution to desegregation. Despite the vital service of black troops in the US Armed Forces, it took until 1948 for the army to be desegregated. Racists fought to disenfranchise and oppress the same black soldiers who had fought for their freedom, with no black soldiers being awarded the Medal of Honor for their service in World War II. If anyone's interested in this, by the way, there's an excellent graphic novel about it called The Harlem Hellfighters. In 1947, black Marines were forced to choose between leaving the service or becoming food provision stewards. These attempts to delegitimize and belittle the contribution of black Americans shows that the denial of public service has been part of a strategy used by bigots in the past. This is all about denying civil liberties to other groups in society. Ultimately, though, it proved impossible to deny freedoms and basic rights to people who had given so much for their country. Trump is using the language of military effectiveness to justify this ban on trans people from serving in the military, claiming without evidence that their inclusion will degrade military effectiveness or put too high of a budget constraint on the military. However, the reality is that he's simply using the military as a cover to attack trans people and push back on recent gains in the fight for equality. Trump is prodding his political opponents into a divisive culture war, and in doing so, he is willing to deny the contributions made by transgender people to their country, either in military or other forms of public service. The same logic we see when people say they don't want to be treated by a foreign doctor or they don't want gay people teaching their kids. Part of it is just straight up bigotry, but the other part of it is saying, I don't want your help because you aren't one of us. The right to participate in public life through military service has often gone hand in hand with the basic civil liberties that we take for granted, the sort of civil liberties that are a foundational part of modern democracy. We should therefore see Trump's ban on transgender people serving in the military for what it is, not an attempt to protect the military's effectiveness and not as a cost-cutting measure, but as a cynical and sickening attempt to disenfranchise thousands of brave people who have agreed to risk their lives for their country in a way that he absolutely never did. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that any denial of military service should be seen as an attack on fundamental human rights. There are probably very good reasons why one country might deny foreign nationals the right to work within their intelligence agency. But I think what history shows is that attempts to deny public service to certain stigmatised social groups are dangerous and almost always motivated by some sort of darker, bigoted belief. Even if they're not seen as an attack on civil liberties, they should be seen as chilling, because it functions as a way of othering and scapegoating a group of people. The othering is a standard tactic of authoritarian regimes, and it never ever ends well. Okay, thanks very much for listening. If you have any comments, please get in touch, or any questions.